The title of the message is A Religious Me Too Society. A religious Me Too society. Now, there's a legitimate Me Too thing. However, there's also a whole bunch of fakers in the Me Too group too. What that's done is it's downgraded the offense by making it a peer pressure, everybody join the bandwagon. I see the same thing go on with any type of disability. Suddenly everybody's got that same disability. Now the one person who really has it doesn't look like that big a deal. Okay, Christians do the same thing from time to time, well, probably more often than we should, but we identify with sin as though everybody's got it. What difference does it make? No, it makes a difference. Stay away from sin. Sin should be exceedingly sinful to us, and we should shun it. But oftentimes this flesh convinces us it's not really that bad. Well, God considers it really that bad. So let's see what he says in Jeremiah. Jeremiah 7, verse 8. Jeremiah 7, verse 8. He says, "Behold, you trust in lying words that cannot profit." Ouch. Everybody's out for a profit, aren't they? Well, don't go to lying words. They do not profit. Will you steal, murder, and commit adultery, and swear falsely, and burn incense unto Baal, and walk after other gods, whom you know not? And come and stand before me in this house, which is called by my name, and say, look at this. We are delivered to do all these abominations. What difference does it make? I've already been sinning, I might as well do some more. God put it in my past, so he must want me to have it. This is reverse Calvinism. It is. It's Christian Calvinism. God gave me sin, so he must intend me to do it. No, sir. That's accusing God. That's making God the one who's providing sin. God didn't provide you sin. We are delivered to do all these abominations. Is this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your eyes? Behold, even I have seen it, saith the Lord. Now notice in that verse, I got to quit stopping, we'll never get through this. Notice in that verse, God didn't say, I consider this house a den of robbers. He says it's become a den of robbers in your eyes. Your opinion of it is it's a den of robbers. But God said, my name's going to be there. My glory's going to be there. I'm going to dwell there. So what are you looking at when you go to his house? Absolutely, the temple back here. His house now is us. We're his tabernacle. So spiritual things, it should be God. Christians do this. They identify with the old man. Don't identify with the old man. Yeah, you're wicked and you're corrupt, but that's not your identity. Don't identify with that. Okay? You're really a son of God. And this other thing is something you're cleaning up. So don't identify with the something that needs cleaning. He says, become a den of robbers in your eyes. Behold, even I have seen it, saith the Lord. But go ye now unto my place, which was in Shiloh. He said, go look where I just moved out of. Where I set my name at the first, and see what I did to it for the wickedness of my people. And now, because ye have done all these works, saith the Lord, and I spake unto you, rising up early and speaking, but ye heard not. And I called you, but ye answered not. Therefore will I do unto this house, which is called by my name, and unto the place which I gave you, and to your fathers, as I have done to Shiloh. And I will cast you out of my sight, as I have cast out all your brethren, even the whole seed of Ephraim. Wow. Satan does this. He transforms himself into an angel of light in order to cover his horrible, gross being. He is sin. But he doesn't want to be seen that way, so he's going to put on a cloak of righteousness. Well, Christians can do that too. We can go around acting holier than thou until we get to the house, take that cloak off and put it in the closet, and then put on flesh and just live in flesh. That's acting like the devil. Christians can act like that. Sinners hide conscious sin. Now, by conscious sin, I mean sometimes we sin and we don't realize we've done that. God reveals it later, and then we confess it. I'm not talking about those sins. I'm talking about the ones you know are sin. The ones you know are sin, guess what? Most of the time we try to hide those. You know how we try to hide it? By exaggerated self-righteousness. Well, they won't think so bad of me. I know they saw me doing this, but they won't think so bad of me if I do this great big thing. God's not impressed. That's who we stand before. This is done by men not knowing two results will come. The first one is self-deception. What's the old saying? What a tangled web we weave when at first we practice to deceive. That's true. You know, when you set out to deceive someone else, the one that ends up getting deceived is you. Now, we can do that spiritually. In the Christian realm, we can deceive others trying to deceive ourselves. We can say, okay, I know I did this wicked thing over there, but I'm going to make up for it and let everybody see this great thing right here I'm going to do. The way it's done, usually. I know we're much more advanced than this, so we would find a more tricky way to do it. But the normal heathen world would do this. I've done something awful. Therefore, I'm going to go down to the church and make a big donation, and, I'm going to buy a pew with my name on it. That type of thing. So that it covers what others have seen of me. God's not fooled. God didn't get impressed because you got a pew with your name on it. He's not. He's going to burn it. It's dangerous to mock virtue by impersonating righteousness. That's what an angel of light does. Deceivers end up deceiving themselves. When a man believes a lie or feigns as though he does, many times we don't believe the lies we tell, but we act like we do. Otherwise, who would be fooled by the lie? He willingly ignores the warning and danger while courting destruction. You can't play with sin. That's the problem, is the devil has convinced most people, Christians included, that sin is not that dangerous. It's a toy you can play with and put up anytime you feel like it. And we can't. Now, sin, that's a very broad topic. And I'm not going to tell you what I'm talking about when I say sin, because it's not me talking. Whatever God tells you the sin is. Because there's different levels of it, and we never get so holier than thou that we don't have to confront sin. Never. That's our whole lifetime mission, is how do we get rid of all this sin? And okay, I did a good job getting rid of that. Now, God, I'm ready to show me some more. What else needs to go? The wicked are taken in their own net. He tells us that in Proverbs. When you start to deceive not only your own self, but those around you, you're just laying a net that you're going to go jump in. He said in John, if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves. So don't begin there. You remember Haman ended up swinging on the gallows because he despised a man. It came back to haunt him. Sin does that. It deceives the sinner. And when we set out to deceive others, it's us what gets deceived. Self-degradation. It puts us down a path we never intended. Pretense of godliness blinds a sinner to the exceeding sinfulness of iniquity and the inability to wake his seared conscience. That's what happens. The longer you pretend sin is no big deal, you've started searing your conscience. Well, if I think it's no big deal, why does God think it's such a big deal? Maybe he doesn't know what he's talking about. See where that's going to lead down a wrong path. When license is given to iniquity, sin grows and new causes are found to blame instead of confessing sin. This is a big one. I sinned, but it wasn't really my fault. This happened. I was reared in a bad family, and then I just had to go murder somebody. No, you didn't. You can't blame it on anybody but you. That's right. That's the Me Too society. The Me Too society has said, I'll give you something you can blame. You're not responsible for that. You've been done wrong. No, sir, you're responsible for all your acts, regardless of who you are or where you came from. The proof of it is if you were a product of your environment, none of us would be any good. But you'll find people that come from some of the worst backgrounds end up being some of the best leaders that we've had. Well, that disproves the point. Okay, we're responsible. We got to take responsibility. And we can't blame it off on something else. Early on, I saw this begin to happen. People would, instead of saying sin, they would say error. Okay. That's a smooth way of deflecting.
Or lifestyle.
Yeah, lifestyle. Shortcomings. All of those things are deflecting from the actual word, sin. Sin means I did something that offended God. And if we can replace that word with anything, we suddenly feel better. But we're not God. When the vocabulary of wickedness that offends God no longer makes a man blush, his unchecked villainy becomes an unstoppable tide of excess. If you can be out in the world and you can turn on the TV program and listen to wickedness pour out of it, and it doesn't embarrass you like it would if God came down there and watched it with you, you know, that's what he sent his son to die for. You think that doesn't burn his ears? Well, if it doesn't make us blush, that means we're heading toward excess in sin. That's where it leads. Christ pronounced these people most hopeless who don clerical robes in order to cover thievery. You remember that in the New Testament. In Matthew 23, there, that whole chapter, he lays it out, buddy. That is a rough chapter. Jesus is coming down on the religious folk. He said, I know you look all pretty and you think you're something, but let me tell you the facts. And he does. In Matthew 23:23, he says this, Woe unto you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites! For you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. Now, we don't think about all that. We read that and we say, go get them. You know, those bad boys, you know, they thought they were something. You tell them all. Wait a minute, did we do any of this? Probably not. He says there they're responsible for doing a bunch of things. We'll continue the verse. These ought you to have done, and not to leave the other undone. Well, that sounds good when we're pointing our finger at the scribes, the Pharisees, and the hypocrites, until we realize there's a mirror on the other side. And it's saying we should be paying tithe of all these things. Now, I understand we're not back under the law. We don't pay tithe. But you should be giving everything to God. We do more than a tithe now. We give him 100%. And then he allocates where it goes. And it's not just money. It's your time. It's your life. 100%. You're bought. And then he says, there's something more than just something you give that's required. It's this: judgment, mercy, and faith. Judgment. Now, maybe it does mean judging between right and wrong, but I think it also means this: using God's judgment. God doesn't trust man's judgment. That's why he gave us his law. He said, this is how to think. So we use his judgment. Put that in our mind and use that one. In verse 25, he says, "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you make clean the outside of the cup and of the platter, but within you're full of extortion and excess." He could have just said America. Excess. That's America. I don't know why it is, but we think we've got to have everything. I know why it is. This flesh. It thinks it has to have everything. And you go to a third world country or somebody down the road who doesn't have as much as you, and they would consider us to have excess. Temperance is one of those things that is not preached much anymore, but the Bible sure mentions it quite often. Yeah, you could, but should you? Excess. Stay away from excess. That's one of those sins that God will convict you of later on in life as you get rid of the big ones. He'll say, let me show you why those big ones happened. You're given to excess. Too much. Verse 33. "Ye serpents, ye generation of vipers, how can ye escape the damnation of hell?" Whew. Now, I understand what he's saying there. He's saying, you're going to bust hell wide open. You better get right. But it still applies because look at it. You and I can still experience the damnation of hell without going to hell. The damnation that hell causes. Start flirting with sin, the repercussions that follow is the damnation that comes from hell. So stay away from sin in any form it shows up. Okay, let's notice the first thing. Well, we've just made it to point one. The pretense of sincerity. The pretense of sincerity. The greatest con a man can pull is to fake as though he's sincere. That's a used car salesman. He's convinced himself of his own lie. This is really the best deal you have ever seen, when he knows it's the worst deal he's ever put on paper. Okay, Christians can do that, and we've been guilty of it before too. Notice in our passage, Jeremiah 7:10. These people have shown up in the right place, this house, and they have the right posture. Stand before me. Okay, those are all the right things. They appear outwardly as righteous men. However, God says, I see beneath the disguise. In 1 Samuel 16, verse 7, the Bible says, the Lord said unto Samuel, look not on his countenance nor on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. This is when God's picking David as king, going to anoint him. He says, don't look at these other guys. That's 1 Samuel 16, verse 7. He says, don't look at these other characters here. I refused them. Now, they would fool man. You remember what happened with Cain and Abel? God rejected one of them and his offering. It was the person he rejected first, then the offering. Make sure we're acceptable to God. The only way you're acceptable is in the beloved, not in me. Not in this flesh we're not acceptable, but in Jesus Christ we're acceptable. So guess what? There's nothing to get proud about. Because it ain't us, it's Jesus Christ. He says, because I've refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth. For man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. Here's the whole Christian life right here. It's boiled down to this, the heart. Keeping the heart right with God and following God. Seeking God continually. That's a hard thing to do, because as life happens, we disconnect from Jesus Christ. I've got to pursue this. I've got to do this. I've got to get so busy in this, and I'll get back to Jesus Christ when I get home and have my devotions. No, sir. The heart has to be right with him at all times. It should be. 2 Chronicles 12. This is... I have a million favorite verses. Yeah. And this is one of them. 2 Chronicles 12, verse 14 is one of my favorite. We're going to start in verse 13. So King Rehoboam strengthened himself in Jerusalem and reigned. For Rehoboam was 41 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 17 years in Jerusalem, the city which the Lord had chosen out of all the tribes of Israel to put his name there. Hey, he's got a great spot to be. It doesn't get any better than that right there. Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Naamah, an Ammonitess, verse 14. And he did evil. Wonder how he did that. Because he prepared not his heart to seek the Lord. Well, we think of great big things as being evil. God says, I look on the heart, and if a man has not prepared his heart to seek me, it's evil. Whew. In Ezra and Nehemiah, it's got to be in Nehemiah, when they get everything built and they decide they're going to have a worship service. They build them a pulpit, but you know the first thing they do? The first thing they do is not sing. The first thing they do is not preach. The first thing they do is pray and repent. You got to get the heart right first to seek God. That's always the first thing. It really does us no good to sit down and read our Bible, to come to church, to pray, to do anything we consider spiritual if the heart's not prepared. You're just putting icing on a dung cake. It doesn't work that way. Get the batter right first, then put some icing on it. God doesn't intend for a man to react to circumstances or blend into them. He expects man to seek the Lord in the circumstances. This is a tough one. Regardless of what's going on now, think back in your life, whatever it is that's going on. Everybody's haunted by something right now. If you've lived your life at all, very long, there's something that you've got to do. There's some major catastrophe or major problem you're dealing with. Okay? That's your life circumstance. Now, don't blend into that circumstance. Don't just give up and give in. And at the same time, don't react to it. That circumstance is going to scare you to death, and it wants to run you. Don't run from it, and don't blend into it. Those are two opposites, but they're natural for the human flesh to do. Do this. Find God in it. He's in that circumstance. If you're a Christian, that didn't happen without His knowing. He's hiding right inside of it. And He wants you to seek Him in the circumstance. The eyes of your understanding have to be enlightened, or else a burning bush looks like a forest fire. And that's a fact. The fruit of the Spirit is grown in adversity, not the sanctuary of a perfectly manicured greenhouse. God begins to grow in us the fruits of the Spirit, and He shows us things that He wants us to have. And He doesn't do that by just handing it down to us. Now, wouldn't that be nice? We say, God, I want some long suffering. Now, don't ever say that. Don't ever. Okay, maybe you can say it. You say it, I don't want to. Okay. If you say, I want some long suffering, He says, okay, I can handle that. He doesn't just suddenly pass you down the ability to suffer long. He gives you some situations where you must suffer long. I heard a man on the radio. He didn't have much to say that I enjoyed, but he did have this to say that I thought was God said this to me. He said, in his circumstance, he doesn't necessarily always look for an answer, because he's decided over 50 years of being a Christian that that's not the way God works with him. It's not necessarily that he needs to answer the situation. He wants to bear fruit. So he asks God, in this situation, what fruit are you developing? Whew. That's heavy right there. That's heavy. And then be careful that we're not working against the fruit God's trying to develop. Tough stuff. right, we better stop it there because I've only made it to point 1. So we'll pick up with point 2 tonight.